Hello everyone. This week we're on Parshat Tetzaveh. It talks about the Bigdei Kahuna, right, the clothing of the Kohanim. We spoke about this last year, and we'll actually be continuing that same Dvar Torah because there's so much to extract from it. It's a Rav Bernstein shiur that should come as no surprise. And he begins by citing that the Talmud, the Gemara, in a couple of places, note that the Chumash seems to juxtapose the Mizbeach, the altar, with the Bigdei Kahuna, the clothing of the Kohen. Now, why is that? Is it just because they're both somehow associated with the Avoda? That is to say, the altar is where we bring sacrifices, and the Bigdei Kahuna are what the Kohanim wear while they're bringing these sacrifices and doing other things in the Beit HaMikdash. So the idea actually goes deeper. And it says, no. What the Bigdei Kahuna do is, it actually affects atonement for the Jewish people. The Mizbeach, of course, by offering sacrifices, that affects atonement for the Jewish people, but so too the Bigdei Kahuna affect atonement for the Jewish people. Now, the Akeda Yitzchak, who was a late Rishon, he lived about probably 500, 600 years ago, he notes, well, hang on, how does this work exactly? Is it simply the Kohen Gadol, or the Kohen, simply by wearing these clothing, it just affects atonement for these Averas? So the Akeda Yitzchak says, no, that can't possibly be the way it works. Rather, it's meant to allow the Jewish people to kind of see the Bigdei Kahuna, see what their message is, and then internalize that message so that they can incorporate it into their day-to-day lives. Now, the Gemara goes on and starts listing each of the Bigdei Kahuna and which Avera it comes to atone for. So last year we spoke about the Me'il, right, and how that atones for the sin of Lashon Hara. So you need to refer to last year's shiur for that. I'll post it, of course, at the end of this year. But this year we're going to look at the Choshen Mishpat, the breastplate. So Akeda Yitzchak says, okay, so let's look at that. Now the Gemara says it comes as a kapara for ivut hadin, perversion of justice. Now again, the Akeda Yitzchak asks, does that mean if there is a perversion of justice, if the Kohen Gadol wears the Choshen Mishpat, then it's okay? No, it's not okay. The point is that a Dayan needs to take a good look at the Choshen Mishpat, and maybe he'll reconsider the way he deals with his cases. So the Akeda Yitzchak lays out for us 4 reasons why justice would not be performed correctly. So he says, first, don't favor people. What happens is a judge, 2 litigants might come in front of a judge, and the judge might know one of them, and he'll be very sympathetic to him. This guy's a friend, he knows what this person is like, he's a good person, and that's that. Or maybe the guy looks nebech, looks like a very poor person, or maybe this guy is very chashuv, he looks like a kind of respectable individual, not the kind of defendant he usually deals with. All of these things need to be dealt with, and at the end of the day, we actually recognize this. Even in secular courts, they'll actually get, at least in the United States, they'll give a defendant, a criminal defendant, the right to be dressed in nicer clothes so that the jury, when they look at this guy, they won't think this guy looks like a criminal and he is a criminal because he's wearing an orange jumpsuit. They say, look like a mensch, wear a suit, and that way, hopefully, people won't be so biased against you. This is the real factor. So that's something we're worried about the judge looking at this at one of the individuals and being either biased in his favor and being biased in his favor. Okay, so that's one. And the second one is that, and we're just dealing with reality here, that the judge can't be intimidated by one of the litigants. After all, again, there was a recent case with, actually, I think this past week, the jury convicted El Chapo Guzman on all counts. This was a huge Mexican drug crime lord, who was tried in the United States over 3 months. This guy's been leading cartels in Mexico for Lord knows how long. He's probably been responsible for countless deaths. He's brought in billions of dollars of drugs into the United States. Not the most wholesome individual. So now this El Chapo figure was actually convicted and imprisoned in Mexico, and they actually escaped him out of prison. Now, can you imagine being a judge who has to try this person, individual, who has such strong connections that he's able to get out of jail and escape, ultimately? So that's the kind of thing that a judge is not allowed to be intimidated by. He can be, even if he's a chashuv person, right? Either a dangerous individual or a very important individual who there could potentially be ramifications for judging against him. The judge can't do it. You're not allowed to do that. Okay? So there's a third way. Now what is that? Maybe this judge thinks, this case isn't really that important. It's such a small amount of money. This whole issue isn't even that big a deal. So that's something that might make him take this a little less seriously. And again, we actually see this reflected. One of the Supreme Court justices currently sitting on the bench, will go nameless. There was a case I don't remember exactly what case it was, but there was a case that was brought in front of them, and it was about $600 that was at stake. So the Supreme Court justice said, like, look, the money said $600. What's such a big deal? Just go and like pay it or whatever, suck it up, you'll deal with it. And this justice was actually lashed out against severely because they said, listen, you're a Supreme Court justice. You clearly don't need to worry about making a living. But for some of the litigants that come in front of you, $600 is a lot of money. But look, in some places, I know, and there are some areas in Missouri, I think in the capital in Jefferson City maybe, where to rent a studio apartment, it costs $300. That's 2 months of rent. That's a lot of money for somebody. If they're really struggling with day-to-day, they're getting paid minimum wage, right? Then in that case, $600 is a lot of money. You can't just dismiss it because to you, $600 isn't that much. That's not the way things need to work. And that's actually reflected in the parsha a few weeks ago. In Mishpatim in Yitro at the very beginning. Yitro, of course, is giving Moshe some advice about how to judge cases. And what's one of the advice? One piece of advice he gives Moshe? Look, kol davar katon, right? Any minor matter you can delegate to these other judges. But kol davar gadol, every major matter they'll bring to you. So what does that mean? A major matter, that is to say, a huge sum of money, they'll bring to you, Moshe. And every minor money, just some paltry sum of money, you could bring to the other judges. Moshe's response is not that way. Just look a few psukim later, and what does it say? Kol hadavar hakasheh yaviu el Moshe. Every difficult matter. Because even if it's just $50, just $20, just some small amount of money, not that big a deal. But this whole issue of law is actually a very nuanced, complex issue. That's the kind of thing Moshe wants to deal with. The hardest cases, you bring those to me. I don't care about the sums of money. That makes no difference. If it's difficult, that's what I want to deal with. I just want to make sure that this judgment gets correct, that the right measure is enacted. That's the third issue. What's the fourth issue? So again, this also sometimes happens. The judge may just not be an expert in this matter. That is to say, they may not have built the requisite expertise and knowledge base in order to pass a knowledgeable psak. That is to say, they need to know what the law is. So those are the four issues that a person can run into that might pervert justice. And we see that the Choshen Mishpat actually comes to repair all this and to negate all of those issues. How so? So just going one by one. So the first one, not to favor someone. So one of the first things we learned about the Choshen Mishpat is that it had 12 stones, each against one of the Shvatim. Now we also know that the Shvatim, they weren't all equal in importance. You had Levi, who were dealing with the Kohanim, right? They dealt with Kedusha all the time. There's Yehuda, who's Malchut, right? Kingship. Those are people who are very important. And then how does the Torah say to order the stones? They say, Ketoldotam. What's the order of their birth? It's not who's more chashuv and who's not. Who's more important? That's not the deal. It just says, if you're born first, then you get listed first. If you're not born first, then you'll get listed later. And that's that. And there's no difference in terms of who's more favored, who's more important. There's none of that discussion. The second issue, that a judge might be intimidated by one of his litigants. So again, there's a pasuk in the Chumash that says as follows. It says, "Lo taguru bifnei ish ki mishpat le'elokim hu," that you should not be afraid in front of a person because you represent God, right? You will stand in place of God in order to execute judgment. And to that end, in the folds of the Choshen Mishpat is the Urim v'Tumim. And Rashi explains that there were certain Shemot of Hashem, the names of God were on it, which means that Hashem is present in Din Torah. You represent Him. You have nothing to fear. Who are you going to be intimidated by if God is with you? Then third, the amounts, right? How much you're ultimately judging on. So Rakei Yitzchak says, if you know the nature of the stones of the Choshen Mishpat, you'll understand that they're not all of equal value. There are some that are extremely common and therefore fairly cheap to acquire, and there are others that are exceedingly rare. There are stories in the Gemara about the lengths and the expense that were taken by the Chachamim in order to acquire some of these stones. And yet, the Choshen Mishpat has 12 stones. If one of them is missing, it's puzzle. Well, what if it's the cheap ones? Doesn't matter. One of the stones is missing. So be it cheap or expensive, even so you need to have all of them. And if you don't have all of them, it doesn't matter which one you don't have. We're missing one, it's invalidated. This Choshen doesn't work. And then fourth, you have the idea that maybe this person won't be such an expert. So here again, we see the Urim v'Tumim. So they had the effect that they were Me'irim B'divrehim. they'd illuminate the question. Is to say you would ask a question, and then it would highlight the question, it would give you an answer, and it would say it clearly and brightly and decisively. You knew exactly what it was he was saying. And the message is, you're not allowed to proceed to carry the Choshen Mishpat and what it represents unless your knowledge is as clear and bright, and you've mastered the areas of halacha that you're judging over, as if it's being given over like the Urim V'Tumim. That's my own little extra vort. But the idea is that just as the Urim V'Tumim are clear and decisive and know what they want to say, so too should you be clear and bright about what the halacha is, and you be able to give and paskin la halacha correctly. And that is the lesson we learned from the Choshen Mishpat. Shabbat Shalom. We'll see you next week.